Behavioural economics on a post-it number 23, the Alexander Solzhenitsyn effect. For those of you who don't know, Alexander Solzhenitsyn was a Russian dissident writer of the 20th century who experienced much misery in his life. He was placed in Russian prison camps in the Gulag, I believe. For periods of his life, he suffered bouts of serious illness. He was expelled from Russia, which caused him much distress. Towards the end, in his later years, he was allowed to return to Russia, which I think he was quite excited about, but then he was ultimately disappointed by that as well. So, what the Alexander Solzhenitsyn effect tries to tease out is that if you look at scenario A here, this might be a life that is lived in a state of unhappiness that is actually worse than death. So we can consider the sort of neutral position to be the origin here. Happiness to be above that, and unhappiness, absolute unhappiness, where you'd rather, that it's a life that's worse than death. It's ultimate disutility, total disutility for 25 years, and then you die at the age of 25. Now, in standard rational choice theory, Benthamite utility theory, whatever, if you add an additional period of pain to that life, that already very painful life, even if the last periods of pain was less painful than the previous experience of pain, then if that pain was still worse than death, you would rather not have it. You would rather have just died at the age of 25. You wouldn't want to live for longer periods because that would give you greater total disutility. Right? So you can ask people questions whereby you ask them to choose between, for example, profile A and profile B in this case. The two profiles are meant to be identical. I've not drawn them exactly accurately, but they're meant to be identical into the ages of 25. But at the age of 25, if you're in profile A, you just die at that point. Whereas if you're in profile B, you live for an extra period of life, an extra 3 years in this case, an extra 3 years of misery that's worse than death, but is not quite as bad as what you've previously experienced. So according to Bentham, as I've just said, according to Benthamite utility or rational choice theory, utility maximization or disutility minimization, then if you were presented a choice between those two, then you would choose A rather than B, wouldn't you? Right? Because you'd want to minimize your disutility. To do otherwise would be a violation of what's called dominance, right? According to utility maximization, this event here is unambiguously worse than this event here. And yet when you present people, these sorts of questions, many people want to live for the extra 3 years of life in absolute misery, and that's been put forward, proposed as a violation of standard economic theory, right? Kind of goes against, if you think about it, in some ways it goes against the James Dean effect, because of the James Dean effect, people would rather have died earlier, but it does still fit with what's called the end effect, right? So the end effect here is less bad than the end effect, the end moment here, and therefore people might sort of process that as being overall better than this particular scenario, just because the ending is not quite so bad, even though it's still absolutely terrible, right? Now, as with the gene, so that's what the Alexander Solzhenitsyn effect is, essentially, is that many people choose B rather than A, and it's possibly caused by some kind of focus upon the end moment. Now, as with as I said about with the James Dean effect, I'm similarly a bit skeptical of this particular observation, just because I think it's probably unimaginable almost for most people to place themselves in these positions unless they actually are in these positions, right? So if you were in a position where your life is so bad, if it's absolutely so bad that you'd rather die, then you'd rather die at that point there, right? Why would you want to live any longer if you thought your life was actually worse than death? But I'll let you all mull over that, or anybody who watches this video, I'll let you mull over that and think about whether you think that there's any validity in the Alexander Solzhenitsyn effect. So that's it. Behavioural economics on a post-it, number 23. Number 23. Yeah.